Radnor Township School District Finance Committee meeting. And so thank you all for being here, and let's get right underway. We have administrative comments from Ms. Deco.
So I'm going to start on page 4 of the document in case anybody was wondering. Many of these questions were previously answered. There were questions regarding legal advertisements of meetings, and that was previously answered, I believe, at a meeting. But we typically advertise in the Suburban. We also use the Delaware County Daily Times. And we notify Mainline Media News of meeting changes. Mainline Media News prints upcoming meetings on page 2 as a courtesy. The actual advertisement is in the legal section. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't update that page 2 section, although we do notify them. There were some other questions regarding other post-employment benefits, which were answered by Mike Mood when he was here. He's our local auditor in December. And the fund balance, and that was also answered at that meeting in December.
Excuse me, Ms. Deco, did you provide this on the table?
I did not.
Oh, okay, good. I just wondered. Thank you. We don't normally. I wanted to make sure you didn't. I knew it was on document. It's her internal notes.
There was also a suggestion back in April to sell new buses with stringent emission controls instead of older diesel buses. The district does use considers multiple issues when determining which buses to remove from the fleet, and emissions are one of those things that we would consider. There was a suggestion that the district purchase steel for the bleachers sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, until the district has a more thorough understanding of the scope of the project, we are unable to move forward with purchasing the steel. In April, there was a concern about the report on teacher absenteeism. That question was answered by Mrs. Stern, who indicated that the Finance Committee would not be looking at that in the future. They were looking at that to address the problem. There was a suggestion regarding interviewing multiple architects for the bleacher project. Just so everyone is aware, we are not hiring an architect at this time for the bleacher project. We are working with a bleacher company. What we will be interviewing architects for next week, the week of June 18th, I'm sorry, it's not next week, it's the following week, is for the additional possible improvements on the field, not the bleacher project itself. There was a suggestion that the summary sheets for the financial reports include an estimated amount for the current fiscal year. I believe that's in reference to where the district thinks it will end up in terms of expenses and revenues. And unfortunately, the current software used by the district cannot accommodate this request. That would have to be done manually, and we just don't have the staff to do that. There was a request or a statement that some of the sports were believed to be underfunded and requested an explanation. And the cost for sports is determined by the number of teams, players, coaches, and officials. Some sports have more experienced coaches who are higher on the salary step than other coaches, meaning they are compensated greater. Some sports may have more teams and may be more expensive to operate. The cost of officials varies from one sport to the other. The cost of officials is set by the Central Athletic League. Although some sport officials are compensated at a higher amount, all schools in the league pay the same amount for officials. And there's also uniform replacement cycle, which can make a sport look like it's receiving additional funding in any given year because the uniforms are being replaced. There was a question regarding wanting an explanation for the increase in football expenditures on the athletic disclosure report from 2015-16 to 2016-17. Football expenditures for 2015-16 were $87,398 for 81 athletes and $94,692 for 103 athletes in 2016-17. The increase in cost is due to several coaches moving to a higher step on the salary scale increase in retirement costs, and an increase to supply and repair and maintenance costs due to the increase in the number of players. There was also a request that future bids be put into context to prior years. I'm assuming that this is in reference to having a comparison. But since the district does not purchase the same items every year, and the items purchased from one year to the next would not be the same, a comparison in this manner would not be an apples to apples comparison. And in addition, the software the district is currently doing does not have the ability to do that. And that's all my comments.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I'd like to invite the public forward to make any public comment about items on our agenda. And if you've signed in at the table to the side, that would be greatly appreciated. And please follow the guidelines as outlined in policy 006. Do we have any public comment? Welcome, Ms. Fertile.
Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne.
Mike's not on.
Now
it is. Hi, I'm Cindy. Thank you for the answer to so many questions. I have a question on the contract that was approved on the board agenda action items for the Fox Rothschild LLC contract. And it was extended to May 31st since today is June 5th. Is the investigation over, or are we going to hear about another extension of a contract at $225 an hour? In tonight's agenda, on the 4.2 board agenda item, where you're listing the buildings and departments and descriptions for items and requests for contracts, etc. Several of them, what would be a help or an assistant to those who review this prior to the meeting, is how do all of the different requests for either new contracts or the legal retainer compare to the current year expenses? That's not given. So it would be nice to know for the next year, are they higher? Are they being extended at the same rate? And on the Act 93 one-page agreement that was part of the agenda and part of the attachments. The first, it shows the 5-year contract and the wage increases. Second, premium share increases toward health care each year. Is that premium share increased by the policy holders or by the district? Is the district going to contribute more? Or the staff and going to be the ones that will be increasing? Elimination of the cafeteria plan, is that a cafeteria plan for healthcare options? That's how I've looked at it. Or is there something different? And if the professional development plan reimbursement, does that mean the teachers will be paying? And the staff will be paying for that on their own. And the very last item, vacation day buyback. I need further explanation on that. It's kind of tough to understand exactly what's being done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fertile. Welcome, Ms. Sherry.
I too would like an update on the expensive, lengthy, and partisan investigation of a school board member who may in fact be a whistleblower, including the cost and why the contract with an outside law firm was extended, and how long is this going to drag on. And my the sports questions continue. Will the football booster club be required to report its dollar contributions this year for the athletic opportunities disclosure reports? And the question about the wildly different funding, I recognize a number of the criteria of funding sports, but clearly ice hockey and crew are very expensive sports that are not funded the way other sports are funded. And I'd like an explanation from the administration or the school board members as to why that is. And the issue of turf replacement was brought up in facility last time, and the relationship of trying to establish a partnership with booster clubs, sports teams. At the last time, there was a guarantee that they were going to be able to participate in replacement of the field. Instead, they decided to take half their money and put it toward expansion of the field. So I think it's pretty clear that you need some kind of parameters in place before things progress and go in a different direction. Finally, Act 93 summary. Yes, you're giving a salary increase, but what about the total compensation with the benefits? So what did you pay an average administrator last year, including the salary and the benefits, and what are you going to pay them next year with the changes of salary and benefits? So that you can actually quantify what the impact of the benefits are. It's very hard to tell and impossible in that summary. And finally, the CAC is reporting back on 2 projects this evening, capital planning and the 2 Roberts Road properties purchased for the entrance to the middle school. There were a number of board members, in particular the chair of this committee, who resisted using professional volunteers from the community to research and provide recommendations to the administration on specific projects, stating the school board was very different from the Board of Commissioners. 2 questions. Did the administration find this committee and its work product to be helpful? And the second question, will the administration continue to endorse using this committee for future issues? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cherry. Mrs. Deco, just for a future note, the question about the turf field, I'm going to refer that off to the Facilities Committee. That wasn't something that we discussed here.
Okay,
Right, thank you so much. Do you have an approval, do we have an approval of the minutes? Has everyone had a chance to look at them, and are we good?
Yeah.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Mrs. Deco, for answering the questions. Alrighty, with that, we are going to move right into our first agenda item, which is the presentation or the report from the Citizens Advisory Committee. So, Mr. Webster, you're going to be the one speaking on behalf, you and Mr. Moore.
That is correct. And
I see several members out here.
Mr. Batchelor is going to lead things off.
Great.
Before they begin and as they get settled, last year when we developed district goals, we set out and identified district goals, and we also, as a board, identified priority projects. One of those priority projects was to look to our Citizens Advisory Committee. We provided them with 5 different topic areas. One in district capital planning, one in district contracted services. The next was district real estate holdings and facility usage. National school lunch program was the 4th, and the 5th was field trip funding. And we had asked our Citizens Advisory Committee, with the guidance of Michelle, working with them, to look at these different items and to give the board feedback on which one of those items we would like to look into more deeply, maybe in a future year. Which one of these items are things that, one of the things we've talked about in setting goals and identifying projects is that we can't do everything all at once in 1 year. And to help prioritize, but also help lend their expertise to identify some areas that we may want to take a closer look. This committee has worked very hard, and we appreciate all their hours and their time. They're coming forward tonight to just share 2 aspects while they have looked at other aspects as well, and they can provide at a future meeting some of those, some of the input that they've covered on those other topics. But with these specific 2 topics, they wanted to share with us tonight, some of their recommendations and findings. And then now it is for the board not to have to make a decision tonight on any of these matters, but for us to consider as we look at developing district goals and identifying priority projects for next year. This may be one item that we would want to, or 2 items that we may want to look into. And also we would discuss what is the future of how we want to use this committee moving forward, especially in light of some of the other items we've identified for them. So just wanted to set the stage. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Dan or you to introduce everyone, so I don't want to miss anyone, but I just want to thank them, and I can turn it over to you, Michelle, if you want to.
So we're fortunate to have all of our members for the CAC committee here this evening. Mr. Webster and Mr. Moore are going to lead the discussion on capital planning. In the back, I have Mr. Salick, who's also on our team.
Hello.
Mr. Hirsch, who is also on our team, and Mrs. Morrison. So I want to thank all of them for all the hard work that they have done, and I'm looking forward to you hearing their presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you. This presentation is about capital planning, and as a reminder to the public, I know you all know we are volunteers and these are just recommendations. Nothing we say here is binding, but we hope that we have been able to provide tools and information to help you as you reform and improve your capital planning process. This was a collaborative process with the administration. The administration provided us a substantial amount of information to talk about how the capital planning process actually works now in practice, and we also were able to get our questions answered with all kinds of information to inform the recommendations in this memo. We also viewed or attended Facilities Committee and Finance Committee meetings, observed what kinds of questions came up about the capital planning process, what projects were funded and why, what the background was of projects, basis of cost estimates, questions about funding. So we wanted to see what board members were interested in when it came to capital planning. Also, the memorandum here talks a lot about facilities-based capital planning. The way capital planning has been presented to you focuses on facilities, but all of the recommendations here apply as much to other long-term expenditures like teaching and learning curriculum, and also expenditures, technology. Yes, absolutely. So please bear that in mind when we consider these recommendations here. Also, talking about the facilities focus in particular, we talked about the capital planning process as the first half of the memo, and then how capital plans were funded is the second main focus of the memo. I'm going to turn it over to Dan to get into some of those details.
Thank you, Brendan. And thank you to the board for establishing the CAC, we call it the Citizens Advisory Committee, and I do look forward to hearing the answers to Mrs. Sherry's questions that she had for you all. When we undertook this process, I do want to emphasize that Michelle and Ken were extremely helpful in the process, as they were in the prior project that we did regarding the lease or buy decision for the iPads, and provided a lot of information that was helpful for us. As many of you are aware, I've attended a lot of the Finance and Facilities Committee meetings, so I'm quite familiar with the 5-year capital plan that you use, and many of the discussions that revolve around that. And we'll probably give some observations on some of the recent discussions, like I think it was the last meeting where Mrs. Booker, you I believe were having a lot of questions about the replacement of the running track and what's the history of that. So one of our recommendations here, we really looked at 4 different areas in terms of the capital planning process, and then we'll talk about the financing afterwards. But one of those areas was project identification. What projects should be funded? Why should they be funded? What's the background of these projects? And what we've realized talking to the administration and watching some of the meetings and looking at your 5-year planning document is that there's not a lot of information on that 5-year capital plan. There's some lines. Oftentimes the line might say something like paving, but it's not really paving, it's sidewalks or something else besides that. And looking at that and looking at what some other districts do, we did a bunch of research in terms of what some of the best practices are. We believe there's an opportunity to establish a process here that gives the board and the administration a lot more information on the projects that should be done, or maybe even for projects that aren't absolutely necessary. They're more like to have as opposed to need to have. But why? Why is the requester of that project? Why do they think it needs to be done? What's the background? What's the amount that needs to be spent? How did you come up with that number? What's the likely life cycle of that project? All the types of questions that have been asked in these types of meetings as you go through the capital plan. So in that regard, what we've done in Exhibit A, and I don't know if it's up here, but hopefully everybody has a copy of it, is we've put together something called a capital expenditure request form. And this is a form that would be, we would recommend it be required to get filled out for any capital expenditure. And in the memo, we have a discussion of what the capital expenditure is. It's anything $10,000 or more or occurs over multiple years. And as Bradley said, it's not just facilities. This would be for technology and teaching and learning, other types of expenditures that would be capital in nature. And on this form, if you take a look at the form, it's just got a lot of information that anybody requesting a project should be able to provide the board and the administration. It's not just, I want some bleachers, or I think we need a new desk or whatever. It has them go through a disciplined process of why they need it, what's the background, the various categories. If you go down on the first page, the various categories that these expenditures might fit into. And then hopefully they've done some legwork as to what an estimated cost would be. Maybe they haven't done everything, because some of these projects, if you're going to go out and get bleachers, there's a process involved in that. But at least they've done some of the groundwork. And we think that by having the requester of the projects do this, it will give them a little bit more ownership. It'll empower them some, but it'll also give them some accountability as to why this project needs to be done. This is something that could be implemented immediately. And I believe the administration appreciates this form and would like to start using it going forward, and I'll let them address that. The next thing that we looked at is related to the capital planning project and what are the identified projects that you want. We talked to Michelle about what the process is currently, and as you're probably aware, it involves going and talking to the principals of the buildings and the maintenance people or the facilities people at the buildings to find out what it is that they need at any particular time when this process starts, usually in September. And then Michelle and Todd Stitzel aggregate these projects. There's a discussion internally, maybe some more back and forth with the building people, and then eventually it either shows up on your 5-year capital plan if it's deemed necessary, or it doesn't show up on there. And the other thing that we would suggest in terms of the project identification is that you maintain a fairly comprehensive list of projects, even those that weren't funded, so that you have some background and some context in future capital planning cycles of what was requested and why it wasn't approved. And this will give you more or less an exhaustive list of everything that people think need to be done at the buildings. And you can make decisions more in a context of, you know, what's the overall need of the buildings. And that process is something that we would recommend you look at least 5 years and possibly longer. Like when you're talking about putting a new roof on a building, that should have a lifespan of, say, 20 years. If you don't do this to the same level of detail, but if you have a spreadsheet, it's really just a spreadsheet that says, okay, in 20 years we should keep in mind that we're probably going to have to replace this roof. So you have this longer term planning horizon for your capital expenditures. Another thing that and Michelle, if I misspeak, or Bradley, if I miss something, please chime in. The second of the 4 items under capital planning process is the project prioritization. At the bottom of your existing 5-year capital plan, and I'm sorry you probably can't rotate that one page when we get to it, but we're not there yet. At the bottom of your current existing project or capital plans, you have a key, a legend of priorities. 1 is safety, and 2 is I don't remember what it is. But we found that those are really they're not defined, and they're subject to interpretation. We would recommend, and we have not proposed at this point, a prioritization scheme for the projects. We think that as part of the approval process, that whoever's approving these projects, they can work with us as well. We'd be happy to provide input, come up with a new prioritization scheme. We've included one example. We aren't condoning or endorsing what's in that in terms of the weightings of various things, but basically what it does is it looks at different factors, it gives a weighting to that, and then you apply a number and you add them all up, and you come up with kind of a rating for every project. Something like this we think makes more sense than the simplified 1, 2, 3, where 1 is always a safety issue, and you might have a high priority project that's not a safety issue. The third area that we looked at, which is Exhibit B of the memo, is the current reporting format. One of the things that I've noticed attending these meetings is I've always felt that there's some information that could be included on this schedule of your 5-year capital plan that would be really helpful to have. In fact, it's come up in some of the meetings when the board members have asked. And that is not just what's the name of the project and what is the spending over a period of years, but give us some more detail on the project. Take some of the information that would be on the CER and actually incorporate it into the capital plan, so that anybody looking at it at any point in time has some details on what that project is. Not just paving. They know what it is, maybe when the last time it was paved, how's it going to be funded, and then also some information in there about, is the project on time? Is it on budget? So again, you're looking at the project, and we've added a couple columns in here that will give you that information that's not currently on the form. Right now, you have amounts spent to date, but you don't have any indication as to what's the ultimate cost of that project going to be. And this will help you have some visibility as to whether a project might be going over budget or not. Again, this is something that we've applied specifically to facilities right now, but we would recommend taking this approach with technology and teaching and learning as well. There could be an expanded version of Exhibit B that also includes these other projects that haven't been approved, but they could be on your list so that you see them there. They're not, you don't forget about them. You know that they've been requested in the past, and it might again provide some context for the overall planning process. And then lastly in this section is something called a facilities master plan. This is something that came up when we were looking at what other school districts do. To some extent, and you were talking about this in the facilities committee meeting just now, you already do some of this. This is a facilities master plan is a document that takes into account what the trends are, what the goals are of the district, what the trends are in terms of enrollment, what the conditions are of the building, and creates a master plan that might go out 25 years. Most of them that we saw went out 25 years or so. It's a big undertaking to produce this. The ones I saw involved putting together committees of people in the district, administration, parents, teachers, and really taking a hard look going out far into the future as to what your needs are. I think that my opinion is this district's in pretty good shape. You might have some enrollment increases, but I don't think there's anybody here thinking we need a new high school anytime in the near future, a new middle school, or even a new elementary school. You might need some space here and there, but no huge projects coming on. But this facilities master plan provides some rigor to the overall long-term capital planning process, and it's something that that we think would be useful to look at. The second part of the two areas that we look at.
Dan, I'll make a couple points
Okay.
about the project process before we talk about funding, just before we move on to that. So number one, we put these into 4 different elements of capital planning, but they all interact with each other. So the extent to which you start collecting information on this expenditure request form, that information is information you'll use as you build a facilities master plan. You can implement the form right away, as Dan said. The facilities master plan is a much larger undertaking, but as you begin to, if you choose to adopt these different elements and improvements, they'll inform each other. Your Exhibit B information comes from perhaps your facilities master plan, comes from perhaps the information showing up on these expenditure forms. So you don't have to start all of this at once, but once you have everything in place, it'll look like a much more organized process, and I think a process that's a lot clearer to board members and to the public as a whole. Another point about that is, as we said before, technology and teaching and learning are just as important. We didn't get as much information about those processes for this, but we would be interested in moving forward and tackling those with a little bit more specificity than we have here. And final, this shows up at the end of the memo, but we might as well mention it here. A new director of operations would help a lot with implementing any of the recommendations that you decide to adopt. At this time, the business administrator and the HR director to some extent have been doing a lot of the work on this capital planning process. It's a much better fit for a director of facilities and operations. So to the extent the district's moving forward with that position, I think that'll help us a lot.
The second area is the funding process for the projects, and And we've broken this down into two areas: the fund transfers, which is typically how you've been funding capital needs, and then bond issues. And I'll go through these very quickly. You just went through the budgeting process, obviously, and the way this process works is you decide what needs to be done from a capital perspective, and then you decide where the funds are going to come from. And you've been in the enviable position of having some funds available to fund the capital needs that you currently have. You don't know that you're always going to be, I assume you don't know that you're always going to be in that situation, and one of the benefits of having this facilities master plan, or at least a longer term planning horizon, is it gives you some visibility as to what you're going to need going out some number of years. Things will always crop up, you can have contingencies, but it gives you some, again, rigor in that process. Rather than going through a process that just says, okay, we need, I don't remember what it was this year, let's call it $1.5 million for capital this year. Let's take 800 from here, 500 from here, and 200 from here. By having a longer term process, it wasn't that much, right? It was more, okay. You'll have some visibility, so you might say, as you did with PSERS, and I understand where the $5 million for PSERS came from. That was money that's kind of left over, but you could have you could say, okay, I'm going to need over this 10-year period, I'm going to need $10 million. But it's lumpy. I might need $2 million here, and then nothing, or a very little amount, and then more. By looking at this longer term horizon, you can kind of plan that out and say, okay, I'm going to need $1 million a year on average. Let's just make sure that we have that money available when we need it, so we don't get in a bind. The second thing that we would recommend here, and you don't have any policy in place, so you might want to consider having a policy, a more formalized policy about that. And then the second issue is bond financing. You don't, again, have any big capital projects coming up, so you're not likely to need bond financing going forward. And frankly, we don't know what the minimum amount is that you could finance. If the bleachers cost $1 million, would it make sense to even do a bond for that? I'm guessing probably not. But to the extent that you have projects in the future that need bond financing, we would recommend that even in some cases, if you have other funds available to do those projects, that you might look at bond financing. We're not recommending taking on more debt. We're only saying that just because there happens to be immediately available funds available at a time that you do a project, you may want to consider that if it's a very long-lived project, that you consider bond financing as opposed to current funding for that. And again, we're not aware of any policy that addresses that, and that might be something that you want to formalize. Again, boards change every couple of years, every 4 years, every 8 years maybe, but boards change, and memorializing some of these things for future boards could be helpful.
No, they don't.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
True, administrators do.
No.
So that's the extent of our presentation, and we're available for any questions that you have.
I, for one, appreciate it completely, though I'm really bugged by the fact you brought up the word CER, because I've been living CER hell with my profession recently, and thanks. Set the reminder of the work I have to do tonight, but very helpful.
Sarah, do you have any questions?
Oh, I'm sorry, were we going in order? I didn't
Yeah,
know we had an order.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll sit on that side
No,
next
no,
time
no.
so I can go first.
Junior to olders that are due. Sarah, do you have questions?
Longevity on the
It's
board,
all
not
good.
age.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
No, I appreciated this. In my corporate experience, you know, obviously capital planning is a big part of what I've seen, and I appreciate that a lot of effort went into this, not just in kind of giving us a basic primer on some financial basics, but also you know, the clear research that went into this, and I'm sure Michelle, you know, has ideas about what's helpful or not helpful, not unhelpful, helpful or overly burdensome for the administration to implement, and I'm sure we'll hear from her on all that.
So I was very much involved in helping creating the forms,
Okay.
and some of those other columns that you see on attachment B were actually my recommendation. I think it's important, as this committee talked about in their meetings, is that there's as much information on that report as you need in order to make a decision. And I, for one, don't really like researching when the track was originally installed and, you know, trying to find documents from 2001. So if we can create that form and have some of that information already in that spreadsheet, whether or not you show it is a different story, but it will certainly make it easier for people moving forward.
The one request that I would have, and I'm sure you would come to it eventually, I know when there are forms where things are weighted and you pick a certain category and it's going to be worth more and more, that happens with the capital planning now, I'm sure. While it's helpful to have the requester say, I think it's this category, I would hope that there's a kind of independent person who says, no, this is not a life and death matter, it's just aesthetic, those kinds of things. And it would be helpful too, I think, some of these things, I wasn't clear exactly what the expenditure category means, so it'd be helpful if, it doesn't have to be on every form, but at least if there were a key, like leverages other funds, I don't know, those kinds of things. Leverages other funds, I understand means something else, but it doesn't seem like an expenditure category the same way safety or deferred maintenance would be.
And indeed, it is our recommendation that it is the administration that assesses the priority. So the form can solicit information about that, but that is something, you know, that the administration would have to chime in on and ultimately determine.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, do you have anything?
Not particularly, but I mean, we all know that we're going to hire a director of operations at some point. So.
It was approved in the budget.
Yeah, it was approved in the budget, actually. So he will have a lot of sheet. They will have a whole bunch of input onto this and a preferred way to move forward. But I'd like to thank all of you. You started with 7, and now it's the surviving 5, I guess.
Started with
all
8.
of you. Started with 8.
It's not as dire as you made it sound.
Wow. We got voted off the aisle. So I'd like to thank you all for your hard work.
Patty, do you have other questions?
No, I have a couple of other, no, thank you very much, all of you. Really sincerely appreciate it. And yes. Agree with all of the stuff you suggest there wholeheartedly, and I will totally support the idea of moving to it as quickly as humanly possible. And I agree, the incoming operations director, no better a way from an onboarding plan than to get to know the district than generating said capital list by understanding what's going on in the buildings and really formalizing that as a part of a learning process. So I actually see that being just a good springboard from the beginning. And it'll grow as we go. But part of that too for me is something I'd asked for in prior meetings, and that is having a documented inventory of the age of certain areas of the building, of the properties that we're doing, and really creating a repository. The second part of it is around the CER and the creation of those. Love that information and the approval process and the history that it helps to build up. Would be helpful that we would have a CER register that's searchable. So, you know, as they're created, even if they're approved or declined or whatever, that we have a database of the CERs and that we've got some repository, searchable repository method around those for historical purposes. And then guidelines on what is capital. Everybody has a different interpretation. I know there's a legal, there's a financial interpretation of it, but there are different spins you can put on it. So having a very clear understanding of what is capital within the school district's confines would be a good start at the beginning of, or maybe even on the bottom of the form. And there are different levels of capital too, right? So approvals, you may not need to go all the way up. You might be able to do a capital approval in a building because a building has, at a certain level of authority, but once it reaches another level, it's got to get up to the administration. So you might want to consider having that kind of a thing too. So even if they're doing something that would qualify as capital, it's part of the budget. We can get it done because it's in my building budget, but for the purpose of tracking everything and making sure the form's filled out anyway, are all my additional, but thank you very much. Huge start forward. I really appreciate it.
And just to clarify one of your latter points, the definition of capital in the memo is the one the district has been using. It's not our recommended definition.
Yeah, I think there's more to it, right, that needs to kind of go around it.
Everybody's good. Okay. So thank you for coming tonight. And just to clarify, I am always appreciative of volunteers' efforts.
Thank you.
And I would say that a couple of years ago, when this volunteer committee was first considered and the request was made, the context of it was supposed to be a citizens audit committee, and I felt then, continue to feel now, that it's our fiduciary responsibility as board members. Turns out we actually heard from our business administration, it's our legal responsibility to be responsible for the results of the audit. So the original iteration of the suggested committee just didn't fit with my belief structure about our fiduciary responsibility with regard to an audit. You know, that being said, as the conversation evolved, so that everyone feels like I'm answering the question, as the conversation evolved, you know, if we have a group of volunteers who want to give us information on all the things to consider, in this case about capital expenditure or some of the other projects that we discussed as a board and placed as priorities, I mean, I think that's great. And I think, you know, for me personally, the line for me is that I still believe strongly it is for me as a board member and for us as a board, but this is my opinion, for us to take the information and ultimately come to the place of a decision and to understand it's our responsibility to take it. That being said, this was super helpful. And you know, if Michelle says that it helps and informs her work, I am all for making our business administrators' life easier. So thank you so much. Do have a couple of questions or thoughts. Some of this, you know, I think as we form some priorities as a board, some of this is, you know, clearly in the realm of facilities, the facilities committee. And there's a very close interaction between facilities and finance, obviously. And I think that will be one of the things our board will have to talk about is what is the way to not basically duplicate the work of the finance committee by having us do the work that the facilities committee might do with regard to facility planning and capital planning, but then have the appropriate pieces of it be the financial component. And this may ultimately speak to Mr. Batchelor's, you know, he has mentioned in other districts that, you know, they do committee of the whole and things like that. I don't know that that's the right answer for us, but, you know, I want to be mindful of not creating double work. So, you know, that's one thing that occurs to me. I love your idea, but I do want to ask you, Mr. Webster, how do you not take on more debt if you do a bond issue?
Oh, you do?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So,
all I was saying was we were not recommending, and we didn't want the public to think that we were recommending that the district take on more.
Okay, got it. Although, I mean, although our debt, you know, our debt ratio is very manageable.
You have capacity to take on it.
We do, and you know, and again, I think that that's ultimately, you know, the information is super helpful, and you know, and it can inform some conversations. So I'm really very appreciative of it, and you know, I definitely hear, you know, Patty and the other committee members echoing that. You know, there is meat in here for us to give good consideration to, and I will tell you, I have not liked our facilities planning sheet for a very long time, mostly because the font is too darn small for me to read. So if this results in a bigger spreadsheet that I can read a little better, I'm good.
Let me address two things, if I may. First of all, you'll note that the font on Exhibit B is extremely small.
Very
right
small.
now. There's a lot of information.
Yes.
There's a lot of information on there, and not all of that information necessarily needs to be printed out every time you see the schedule. But it's information that's on there so that if you ask certain questions, it will
On how to call them and you're good to go.
It'll be available.
Right.
Also, if you are able to read the footnotes on there, that schedule is meant to have much more thorough descriptions of the various projects. For the purpose of giving a template or an example, we didn't build out all those descriptions for the various projects, but the intent would be that you might consolidate the comments column and the description column into one and just provide much more background on the project. Not pages, but a nice full paragraph of what the project is.
Right, that's the beauty of hiding a column.
That's right.
Exactly. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So with that, do we move on?
The next one.
Yep. And I just want to be mindful of the time. You're going to move on to the next part of the memo.
We are, yes.
Yeah, okay, great.
I'll ask Mr. Hirsch to come up if he's good. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
The other thing, Susan, is to address the other issue, which is this, you thought that this was more facilities. We agree, capital planning is very largely a facilities role, as will the next topic, the Roberts Road properties that we're about to discuss. Because this committee was constituted by the Finance Committee. We actually talked about should we CC the Facilities Committee on here, but we were really constituted by.
You got half of us.
Yeah, right. We were constituted by Finance, so we decided we would keep it official with you, and you can hopefully share this with
Yeah, Amy's
the
back
remainder.
there, and I'm sure Andrew's upstairs
Yeah.
watching. On
No, I
the
appreciate that.
I can go get them if you want.
No worries, we're good. Alrighty, let's let you move on, thank you.
Great. Hi, I'm Bud Hirsch. I live at 21 Haymarket Lane. And thank you. It's been a pleasure working with everyone on this committee. We were tasked with this project of looking at the two properties along Roberts Road that abut Sproul Road to come up with a recommendation regarding whether the school district should consider a sale of these properties. And basically what we did, that there was an appraisal report done several years ago by Jack Coyle, who's a very well-regarded appraiser in this area, and that he came up with a appraisal of the properties, basically that they be sold as residential development property for two homes, because the properties themselves had come to the end of their useful life, that they were at the time probably 60 years old, and now they're about 70 years old. And so the properties, we did not get a chance to go inside the properties because they're leased, so we didn't see the actual condition, but we did see pictures of them from his report, and that the properties, from what we could tell, look like they're deteriorating, and that, of course, as rental properties, that probably don't get the kind of upkeep that you get as a single family homeowner. So what we did was we looked at the different aspects of the report, considering the aspects of keeping it versus selling it, and then really giving you a list of pros and cons about whether what the pros were of keeping the properties, and then also what the pros would be of selling. The main reasons to keep the property, probably the largest one, is that there is a concern that the entranceway off of Sproul Road would be better protected if the school district obtained ownership of these properties for some time potential development like was considered for the middle school. That, you know, is an item that people would debate and consider whether it's needed, and also ultimately, even if it were needed, would it be blocked from actually happening if there was a different owner of the property. So that's certainly one of the reasons to maintain it. Another is that the properties generate roughly $25,000 a year of net operating income to the school district. That, you know, is a number that we worked with to kind of, we don't really have a real estate management company that runs these properties, that they're run through the school district. So running it as a, what should I say, a for-profit residential rental properties is outside the norm of what the school district does. The benefits of selling the properties, one of course is the amount of capital money that you would get from selling the properties as to what are the properties worth, and that under the Coyle appraisals, it looked like it was about $650,000. We really don't have an opinion as to what they would be worth on the sale, and part of our recommendation would be that if you did consider a sale, that you get estimates of value from several realtors in the area, because I think that it's not your usual property sale, that they're not in a residential neighborhood, they're isolated, they've been not well maintained. Having comparable properties to compare these values to, given where they're located is hard to come by. So it would be very good to get, in my opinion, 3 or 4 active real estate agents to give you their views as to how attractive these properties would be for sale to developers. One of the other benefits of sale is that the properties are currently non-taxable because they're part of the school district ownership, so you would be collecting taxes on these properties. If there was a sale, you would also not have to do the different maintenance responsibilities, management responsibilities that you have now, which I think, from a personal standpoint, are probably going to get greater, because as they get older, you're going to have some hard decisions as to whether or not to invest money in a roof and in other systems in a property where the value is really in the land, not in the building. And then I think another issue that I would also be concerned about is one of liability, that when you rent these properties out to other people, and if they're not managing their lives or whatever as well as possible, having these properties being owned by the school district with other people in them that you have pretty minimal control over is an issue that you would be, in my view, probably better off if they owned it themselves and not have people look to the school district if there's a problem that's generated there. That all being said, what we felt was that unless there's a strong reason to keep the properties, that it makes good sense to explore further the value and the ability to sell these properties and then decide ultimately if you want to go forward with the sale.
Could I just add a couple things to that, Susan? For those that aren't familiar with these properties, we should point out that they abut the rear of Ithan Elementary School. The entrance is on Roberts Road off of Sproul Road. And our understanding is that they were originally acquired for the reason that they have a curb cut on Sproul Road, and curb cuts are oftentimes difficult to get. We don't know that if you gave up these properties that you wouldn't be able to get a curb cut in the future. But if you want to make that assumption, then these properties currently provide you with that curb cut. So our understanding is that Ithan Elementary was looked at as an expansion opportunity at one point for the middle school, although I think that was after they were actually acquired, but I don't know what was happening in 1980.
They were within like 6 months.
Obviously, you built the middle school in Wayne, so the question is, do you now think that one of the questions is, do you now think that you need to retain that curb cut for future expansion of the property? The $25,000 a year that the properties generate currently for the district is before capital costs. So if you have to go in and put a new roof on the properties, that's going to come out of the $25,000 a year. And then the current leases on the property, one is month to month, so you can get out of that lease on fairly short notice. The other is through next June 2019, end of June. So you have some time if you were to decide that you want to sell these properties. You've got a year or so until that lease is up to sell the property.
Thank you.
And then just to riff off of what you had previously said, the committee had a lot of discussion about whether we should even make a recommendation on these properties, because we know that there are likely different opinions on what should be done with district real estate. We ultimately decided that we would provide a recommendation, but obviously it's just a recommendation based on what our conclusions were, which is not needing the curb cut anymore because of the expansion, the funding that you would get from selling properties that would be available for other uses, and then the ongoing additional revenue that you would get from the taxes, combined with this isn't really the school district, in our opinion, the school district's core competency.
Thank you so much. Do we have questions? You do.
We'll follow
Sarah Hatter.
No, I don't have any questions, but, and again, I appreciate you guys looking at this so thoroughly and reviewing all this. One of the things though that I noticed, and I think we all know the value of property in Radnor keeps going up, was that when we first bought that property, we bought all of Ithan and that little strip with the 2 houses on it. And that was in '62, it looks like, and I noticed you noticed the discrepancies too. for a little over $200,000. When we went back in 2002, so 40 years later, we went back just to buy a little over 2 acres. It cost us $675,000. Now, obviously, some of that may have been because people knew there was value to us because it abutted Ithan, but that's a huge jump. And, you know, coming onto the board, I did some research and understanding, you know, we used to own property over across from the Methodist Church, where there's now a corporate park. We used to own property up above the high school, where we had, both of those properties had elementary schools on them. Look at Stoneley is kind of the call word these days, right? I don't want to end up like Lower Merion, suddenly at a loss for property to build on. And Ithan is a huge property, and certainly we could, you know, take away all other kinds of property on Ithan's property, right? They have beautiful tennis courts, they have nice fields. But why would we do that when we have a property that's ripe for development if we need it? And I would just have concerns as soon as you give that away, knowing what gets developed there. So I really appreciate all the effort you went through in digging out old documents that I don't think I had seen. And I appreciate that you understand both sides of the issue. I'm never inclined to sell district property if we see a potential use for it. And I worry, especially as we talk about enrollment and expansion of the elementary schools, that if we needed to expand, we can't expand at Radnor, right? Our footprint is set there. Wayne also has limited ability to expand because their property is smaller. Ithan is the ideal spot. If we had to, you know, and this whole board could be long gone, but if we had to, that seems to me like property that would be really valuable for us to have. So I'm not inclined, but it's obviously not my decision. I'm just one member of the board. So, but thank you.
Mike, questions?
No, I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you guys again for your hard work. I know all the time it takes, especially to dig up historical stuff in Radnor. Nobody keeps good records of anything. As president of my neighborhood association for 4 years, you know, we've been calling the field in the middle of our neighborhood the wrong name for 30 years. Actually has a name. So
Thank you.
I just want to thank you guys.
Patty?
Yeah, I do. So interested in this discussion around these properties. Now, we've had it since I've been on the board probably 3 times in full. The COIL report was the COIL report's actually about this thick, so if you're actually interested in seeing, oh yeah, no. The COIL report at the time actually did a full analysis of all of our assets, major properties, so you could actually then see the full inventory of all the properties we currently own. It's actually a really good report, and members of the board should get a copy of it when they get on the board, because it's important.
There's actually 2 COIL reports. There's the one that you're talking about that is very, very thick, and then there's a much thinner one. So there's actually 2 reports, but it did talk about all of district-owned properties at the time when it was done.
They were we reviewed them in public meeting. Yes, it was facilities that commissioned the COIL team to go, and we reviewed those in public meetings. So they're out there. Yeah, we did. I'm sure I probably have records of it in my basement, along with all my other school board stuff since 2003. I'll pull them up for you. I probably have records of when we bought the property too, because that was in the middle of the Keepin and Wayne debate about where to put the middle school, and I have a whole file on that as well. So if you guys want more history on them, I'm happy to pull it up. My interest in terms of questions around how far you guys went in looking at this was, and I think some of the conjecture about those 2 properties, given that we bought them for the purpose of the middle school entrance, as you've noted, a curb cut on that intersection. The property is 55 acres, in case, like, really, it's healthy to take a look at that report, because there's a lot of information in that report. Though some of it is steep slopes, and you can't really build on it, which is why we didn't build the middle school there. At least that's one of the main reasons. But since then, the contention has been that the school district is not in the business, should not be in the business of owning, and in fact may legally not be allowed to be in the business of owning rental property. Like, we have certain restrictions around what we're allowed to invest in, or all of those kinds of things. So I'm interested to know whether was that a part of, if you guys researched that element of it, or?
No, we weren't aware of that.
Okay,
Well,
so that would be one thing I would like to then further expand, not necessarily sit as the advisory committee, but with you guys decide how you want to do that. But I would like us to either dispel the myth or just confirm, or maybe that's the same thing, one way or the other. If these properties are really there for the purpose, and we have no clear need for them with 55 attached acres, are we really technically kind of walking the edge about whether we should be holding those properties and using them for rental purposes? That would be my thing. And I guess the other thing, and I don't know real estate, like, you know, personal real estate, yeah, sure, but I don't know the real world. But in terms of value, I appreciate the idea of having someone come in, you know, from the real estate, what's going on in the real estate environment now. That $650,000 estimate was some years ago.
2013.
Yeah. So I'd be interested to see if it has increased in value at all. In terms of the PL, and let me finish my thought on that. I'd be interested to understand what that real estate value would be of the land, because we are talking about the value is the land for sure. We could always, if we wanted to really see, and we were skeptical about it, we could test the waters. We could say we'll sell the properties for $750,000 each and see if we get any biters. If we don't, we don't. But if the board was interested in exploring it to that degree. But I'd go high, because I think if we're going to sell them, I think people would pay for those properties where they are. And in the bit of seclusion that it is by itself. But, my other question was around the PLU, and I'm wondering if anybody, again, this is actually whether we do anything to sell the properties or not. I think it comes back to how this property that we're on here is improperly registered in the title, was done improperly at the time when we redid. There was a whole bunch of stuff we did. There's a piece of our land here that actually shows us the township's property when in fact it's our property and vice versa. So the titles can be registered wrong, and I'd be interested to really know whether there is truly a PLU, because back when Coyle did this report, we couldn't find any evidence of that PLU. And when did that happen, and how did that happen, and why did that happen? And is it really? Just kind of interested to know, like, while we're doing this other title discussion, whether we can get some real information around that.
We can look into that. I know that Ernie Angelos has been working on the deeding issue. I can reach out to him and see where he's at, because there's several parcels that have been identified incorrectly, as well as a property near Radnor Elementary, which we purchased, and there was a home on it, and that home was destroyed, was demolished. Yes. And the home is still on the tax roll. So
the nature farm, the nature property behind the part of the building. Yeah.
So he's been working on those issues.
And I appreciate clearing them up. So for me, regardless of how we move it forward, for me it's just getting that stuff clean. And if we're looking at our properties, we should take responsibility to be sure that we really understand whether they're zoned that way or not, or is that also something of something that needs to be fixed. Anyway, they were my only comments and questions, and thank you very much. Really appreciate both reports.
Oh, go ahead.
May I just address, if you wanted to get a valuation of the property, you don't actually have to put it on the market either. Of course, you could just go out to some realtors and ask them to give you an estimate of the value. I think realtors generally do that, hoping that when you sell it, you'll get their
Come
business.
back to them. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that information. You know, again, this is something for us to take back to the board and, you know, see if the board wants to pursue any aspects of, you know, the second memorandum. But thank you. We asked for it, and it's super thorough, so we really appreciate it. I didn't realize it had changed hands so many times, so that was brilliant. And actually, the Radnor Township School Authority name, I found that we changed somewhere between whatever
Actually, we still have it. Radnor, we still have that authority.
Is that what it's called?
The title
Authority used to be required in order for you to float a bond issue. That changed some time ago, and a school district couldn't actually make the bond payments. It had to be made through a school authority as well as the borrowing. That has since changed. Many districts still have them because they didn't dissolve them. So we do still have a school district authority, but it's not active.
Got it. Thank you so much. All right, I'm just mindful of the time, so I'm going to thank you both. And everyone else, Mr. Salick, Mrs. Morrison left, and Mr. Moore, thank you.
Susan?
Yes.
You mentioned the changing hand, one of you mentioned changing hands so many times. There is one typo, because we only reviewed this 20 times. There's a date that's wrong on the second page, middle paragraph. It says 1908, it should be 1980.
Thank you.
That changes everything.
All right.
Your superintendent pointed that out.
Got it. All right, so I want to just move into our agenda item 4.2. We have a series of items for approval. I guess they'll be on the June agenda. Is that so?
That is correct. They will be on the June agenda. In addition to the ones that are listed here, we've had a couple of things that have come in since we released this agenda. That we normally do this time of year. There's some additional grants and donations. We're hoping that PDE will release the tuition rates based on 2016 for use during 17-18. That typically happens in May. As of today, I did not see it posted, but I anticipate it will be before our June meeting. We will also have approval of the hot lunch meal prices for student breakfast and student lunch. They will remain the same in 2018-19 as they are in 2017-18. And then we have some additional disposals, some books at Radnor Elementary, some books, some CDs, art prints, and DVDs at Radnor High School, and district-wide 3 AED devices to be disposed of.
Okay, so then what you're saying is that we should expect additional items in this particular action item on the board agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Regarding the there was a request to have the prior year's cost. I mean, I am not a fan of smaller print, and more columns equals more print, smaller print. But my concern is that that request would be burdensome to go back to every contract we have and be putting in the amount as last year. I mean, all of that information is readily available on the district website. If someone wants to know, for instance, anecdotally, you were telling us that the rates for Whistler Pearlstein, for instance, are the same as last year. Anecdotally, we know that. If someone wanted to know that and we hadn't already said it, they could just go look at last year's approval of that item and see for themselves if it were the same or not. Yes, no?
Yes, they could. We typically, if we know the information, like Whistler Pearlstein, for example, that is exactly the same, and the same with the lunch prices, we will put that in the board resolution.
Okay.
This is really just to notify you of agenda items that you can expect to see on the board agenda next week.
Okay.
At
the end of the month.
So question on that though, as you guys are evaluating these contracts, right, because obviously, we don't as a committee get into each one of these individual line items. We rely on the administration to come to us with recommendations. We typically only pull out the ones that require discussion or maybe some sort of a sea change or whatever along the way. But if it's just business as usual, we don't normally get into the discussions. But I'm assuming you do. So you would know if there was a percentage of change year to year. So maybe rather than putting in last year's number, this year's number, something to contemplate might be the percentage of change over the year. So it's a 2% change from last year or a 0% change, just as a point of reference. Instead of getting into a bunch of numbers and whatnot, since you're doing it already, you might want to consider it just for the purpose of clarity.
Okay, I do want to just give a couple of brief highlights on the Act 93 because it's part of that consent agenda. Just to clarify, the premium share increase is, so premiums can go up every year and the district will pay more, but the premium share increase, just to be clear, is the percentage that the administrator will be contributing toward the cost of the premium. And that is set to increase every year. Obviously, as premiums go up every year, the district's costs will go up as well. But we have the Act 93 people have agreed to pay a larger percentage of premium cost sharing, which we appreciate.
So before we get to the meeting, maybe you can change that bullet point to say employee contribution.
Yeah, I mean, I think we
premium
can
share however you want, but just add a little clarity to it.
Yeah, this was just meant to be a brief
overview.
overview. With regard to elimination of the cafeteria plan and professional development, one of the things we discussed is that professional development does in fact have its own budget line item. So, administrators will still be getting professional development. And some of these other items, Michelle, let's see if we can make it a little bit more clear for the board meeting. But I just wanted to answer a couple of those quick questions easily, and and go forward from there. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Did anybody have any questions about the Whistler Pearlstein contract? It's going to be on the agenda for approval.
No, I just wondered, and we talked about this a little bit, Susan, that the approve and award of bid supply and equipment bids.
Yes.
And I just wondered if there's gonna be any explanation of that. I just, having seen the policies, it sounds like we're leaving the purchasing consortium and we're running the bids ourselves. And when the cost value just says per bid, it feels irresponsible of me not to know a little bit more than that.
Where's the detail?
The detail's actually posted on the website.
Okay.
A bid can have many, many pages because it's specific by line item
Right.
and it records
Type
all
of
the
pens,
responses.
type of pencils, color.
And everyone who replied to the bid so that we can do an analysis. So we do post all the detail on the website. We actually are not leaving the consortium.
Okay.
We do use the consortium for a variety of things, but we feel that we have better control over the quality of items that we receive and the way things are packaged and shipped, which we don't have if we use the consortium. And when you use the consortium, you have to rely on all the other districts that are participating to agree on the item that's going to be purchased. We're doing it ourselves. As I said, we feel like we have more control over the quality of the items that we receive. But we use them for trash removal, we use them for diesel fuel, we use them for electricity, we use them for multiple things. Some custodial things, we've used them for paper in the past, we're currently doing our own paper bid. But when we find, and we do a comparison of what the consortium paid for specific items and what we're paying, and we've been able to beat the prices over the last few years.
I apologize for misspeaking. Thank you for clarifying for everybody else.
Okay, great. So with 4.3, the school-based access program settlement agreement, Michelle, if you could just give a 30-second bullet point of what that settlement agreement is about.
So in 2012, 2013, this goes back all the way to 2012-13, there were changes to how the Department of Human Services did the calculation for the school-based access program. And as a result of that, you may recall that the district was overpaid by about $95,000 in 12-13. It took them about 2 years to get the problem corrected, and so it was recommended by the solicitor that until that problem got corrected, which was in 2014-15, partway through the year, that we file an appeal on our cost settlement and for those other years. So that would have been 13-14 and 14-15. This is an agreement, a settlement agreement on the appeal filed for 14-15, which will close and consider it withdrawn and ended. And it just needs to be signed. You'll note that it's multiple districts, so you may see a page for a district that's not ours. That's because we filed a joint appeal together.
Okay. And then finally, the last item doesn't really require action from us tonight. It's just to let you know that at the business board meeting, there will be the appointment of voting delegates for PSBA. That's the October meeting. Typically 3 board members go as voting delegates. And between tonight and the business board meeting, 3 board members will be identified by the board president to volunteer, and we will officially vote them in at our business meeting.
It's official arm twisting.
I think
So
Mike's
it's-
gonna
yeah.
go there.
Slow
Maybe
down.
she'll
I
actually
can't
ask.
write fast enough. It's good.
Yes, so this is more
Just gonna
just a
call
heads
someone
up.
Sunday night. You are now volunteering.
It is a heads up to know that we will be making appointments at the June business meeting. And of course, if anyone on the finance committee would like to volunteer to be one of the delegates, please let Ms. Solomon know.
If you're not at the June meeting, you're a delegate.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Exactly, right, exactly.
You
There you
better
go.
show up.
I don't think we have any new business, so with that, I'm going to call our second public comment. If there's anyone who'd like to make comment. Give Ms. Bertle a moment or two to make her way.
I'm running.
Don't rush.
My legs are short enough, this makes it hard. Just a couple comments. Thank you for the explanations on some of the items that were attached. One thing I didn't understand, I know I'm going through the Act 93 bullet points again, but in the question of the elimination of cafeteria plan and professional development, Ms. Stern said that is it being eliminated from the contract? Because what Ms. Stern said was there's a line item for professional development. That just means it's going to continue, so why does it say elimination from the contract?
I'll clarify that at the board meeting.
Okay. And the other is I too would like to thank the CAC for the fine presentation. It was like pulling teeth to finally get this group together, not to get the group together, but to get the approval from the board. And after seeing and hearing from Bill White, the commissioners and the staff at the township, although they are no longer working with the CARFAC at the moment, but how much they helped in all of the decisions that he made in his position with the township, that it was great to see it finally happen here, and also to know that one item that's been discussed many, many times are the rental properties that I'm just thinking that the concern is the access to Sproul Road, Route 320. Is that necessary? When everyone's talking so much about safety, that's an easy access right into the school. So is that something the school still needs? I was just thinking of safety and security, which is such a high discussion these days. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Webster, welcome back.
The city reminded me that we wanted to, if you want to share in the accolades of the CAC, we would like to have some more members join us. So I don't know how you go about identifying those people, but we've talked to both Ken and Michelle about that. So it'd be nice to have some more interested Radnor residents.
Thank you so much. All right, seeing no further public comment, we are adjourned.
Well, hold on, so what are we gonna do about that? I mean, honestly, are we at a point where we should put out a request to the community if anybody's interested in joining?
We just recently did that.
Okay.
It was,
Sorry, I missed it.
It was in the spring
Bradley?
that we did, and that's how we were able to have Bradley join us.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we didn't get much traction.
Okay.
It was only posted on our website. I know that we talked about it at the committee meeting. I'm not sure that we talked about it at a board meeting. We can certainly put something in the Radnor Reader again that Mr. Petiti sends out, and we can advertise again for people, you know, to join the committee or send a letter of interest if they are interested. We can certainly do that. That's easy enough to do.
Okay, thanks so much.
And I just wanted to step in just to clarify a question, just
Sure.
that it is an elimination of the professional development dollars that have been previously in the contract for Act 93, and it is an elimination of the cafeteria plan dollars that have been previously in the Act 93. The professional development, though, we still have opportunities,
Right,
which was to the which was not included in these personal dollars, opportunities for conferences, you know, based on administrative approval that happened, and we'll be able to continue for some of our administrators as needed. But these professional development dollars have gone away and won't exist anymore.
Right, thank you so much, Mr.
Yeah,
Batchelor.
that's right.
Okay, so with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Board meeting?